Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye in Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Liberia's president makes the surprise announcement that university education at public institutions will be free. Meanwhile, the dearth of good schooling in the country leads to calls for an academy to be kept open, even following allegations that a staff member raped children there. Also, the standoff over Algeria's parliamentary speaker continues. Opposition MPs boycott the voting of a replacement for Said Bouhaja. He still refuses to step aside despite accusations of mismanagement. And in Ethiopia, the ancient churches of Lalibela are some of the most popular landmarks in the country. Today, some villagers are using the techniques used to carve the buildings out of rock to make modern-day sacred sites. We take a closer look. But first, there are huge celebrations at the University of Liberia on Wednesday after President George Weah made the surprise announcement that tuition fees were being scrapped at public universities. Take a look.
In the name of the Liberian people and our government, I therefore declare free tuition.
Well, Weah took office back in January and says that he wants to make Liberia an example to other African nations. It's an ambitious goal. From 1989 until 2003, the country was caught up in civil war and education suffered as a result. 2/3 of children don't have access to any. The scarcity of good schools has complicated the tackling of a scandal at an academy where a founding staff member alleged to have raped several children. The MTM Academy had been due to be shut down, but this week some parents took to the streets, demanding that the US-backed institution stay open. Laurent Berstecker has more.
Fighting for their right to education, dozens of students and parents took to the streets of Monrovia this week to protest against the closure of MTM Academy.
If this school is closed down, who will be willing to take in these children? Because of the stigma they carry, who will want them? There is no other school that would take them in right now.
The school, founded by American charity More Than Me in 2013, aimed to empower and educate girls and protect them from sexual violence. But in 2014, several students accused the charity's Liberian co-founder, McIntosh Johnson, of rape and sexual assault. Johnson was suspended, arrested and put on trial before dying of AIDS in 2016, in a story that largely went unreported at the time. But last week, U.S. news website ProPublica revealed the details of the scandal, sparking outrage among Liberians and leading the country's vice president to call for a thorough investigation. Faced with pressure from students and parents, authorities have now agreed to keep the school open during the probe.
We are here to tell you on behalf of the young people that we have not reached any decision for them to be put out of school. Our advice to you is for them to go back to school, run your daily activities until we get to a logical conclusion. But no school is going to be closed right now.
The More Than Me charity currently runs 19 schools in Liberia and has received hundreds of thousands of dollars in financing from the U.S. government.
Burundi boycotted the last round of crisis talks aimed at setting up elections for 2020. They had been due on Wednesday, but were pushed back until at least Thursday after the ruling party asked for a rescheduling, saying that October is a month of mourning. Now, the country has seen fatal unrest and political turmoil ever since President Pierre Nkurunziza's eventually successful bid for a third term was announced in 2015. At least 1,200 people have died and over 400,000 displaced since. The East African EAC bloc is trying to broker a deal between Bujumbura and the opposition in delegate negotiations in Tanzania. Algeria's government coalition elected a new parliamentary speaker who can't step in as the man he's due to replace refuses to go. The standoff is part of a political crisis caused by MPs' efforts to oust the president of the National Assembly, who they accuse of mismanagement. Opposition lawmakers boycott Wednesday's vote, though, and Said Bouhaja says that the attempt to oust him is illegal and that he is not going anywhere.
320 votes in favour and 1 abstention. As expected, Mouad Bouchareb of the ruling FLN party was elected as president of Algeria's National People's Assembly. But there is one slight problem. The incumbent president, Said Bouhaja, says he will not step down. Wednesday's vote was the culmination of weeks of mounting anxiety in Algeria as the country faces its worst political crisis in 2 decades. It all began last month when Bouhaja fired the Assembly's Secretary-General Bachir Slimani, a move which angered members of his own FLN party. Around 200 MPs from 5 different parties have since called for his resignation, accusing him of mismanagement, illicit spending and dubious recruitment.
We are within our rights. We have the right as the parliamentary majority to withdraw confidence from someone that, for us, no longer has the trust of the parties that supported him and chose him for this position.
The request, however, has no legal basis, as Algeria's constitution does not include any procedures to forcibly remove the president of the National Assembly. According to Algerian law, a vacancy can only be valid in the case of resignation, death or incapacity. Said Bouhaja, meanwhile, has denounced a plot to evict him and says he'll stay on until the end of his mandate in 2022. Members of the opposition, too, have condemned an illegal procedure.
He has a 5-year mandate and he can't be dismissed without his own consent. We are not behind him, but the problem is that we are violating the constitution and rules.
It's unclear what comes next. President Abdelaziz Bouteflika is yet to speak publicly about the ongoing crisis.
In Ethiopia, the ancient churches of Lalibela, dug into living rock in the 12th and 13th century, are some of the most popular tourist sites in the country. These monumental buildings reflect an ancient Ethiopian tradition, and today some villagers are using the techniques to carve their own modern-day sacred sites.
They are more than 8 centuries old, and these 11 Orthodox churches at Lalibela are still as majestic as ever. Legends say that angels helped King Lalibela hew them out of living rock. They're still shrouded in mystery, and researchers still haven't been able to piece together how long it took to build the site.
We have many kind of stories, but we have to understand very well, just with supported by science and to understand the place.
200 kilometers north, the sounds of chisels ring out. Father Gabriel Georges has never been to Lalibela, but he uses the same construction techniques used there. For 3 years, he's worked with about 15 artists to build a new church. Today, he's adding the final touch to the 3rd sacred site carved into the stone.
To make this column beautiful, we need to dig again and again, like this.
The wall colors depend on the stone. The priest has no plan. He's inspired by photos of existing churches to imagine the architecture of his own.
The main motivation for me is spiritual benefit. Secondly, this work serves as history and heritage for the local community.
There are dozens of these new churches being built in Ethiopia. They're replacing older, dilapidated buildings, and it's cheaper to build new ones than undergo repairs. Michael Gervers has spent years studying the churches.
They say we're building this church for our children, and there won't be any restoration to do for 1,000 years. It may not be entirely true, but it is in a way because it's less expensive.
Many of those funding the construction are also hoping they'll draw tourists to the region. Lalibela receives about 40,000 visitors each year.
And finally, South African rapper Jabulani Tsambo, known as HHP, has died. The 38-year-old was one of the biggest names in the country's rap scene. Over 2 decades, fans say that he changed the game by singing in local languages at a time when most South African artists were imitating American-style rap. The details of his death haven't been shared, but we will leave you with the sounds of one of HHP's biggest tracks, Bosso. Thanks for joining us. Do so again.